Hey, gang, welcome to the Happy Hour Live webcast from WhiskyCast.com. I'm Mark Gillespie in the WhiskyCast studio. It's the start of a holiday weekend, Memorial Day weekend here in the U.S., bank holiday in the U.K. and Ireland, and hopefully it'll be a good one. Hopefully you'll have good weather for you wherever you are in the world tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll be joined in just a couple of minutes by Mark Reynier, the managing director at Ireland's Waterford Distillery. And I'm sure we're going to have some interesting conversation with him as well. But right now, I want to bring in our pal Kieran Healey-Ryder from White and Mackay. Let's talk real quickly, Kieran, about what's going on at Jura next week with the Isla Festival being canceled physically, but you guys still have stuff going on virtually, right?
We do. Good evening from Scotland. Yes, we have our bank holiday weekend too, and typically the weather has taken a turn for the worse just as we have extra time off. So typically Jura has always been the additional cousin of the Isla Festival because we're ever so close, but we're obviously on a separate place. So previous years we would have shared a day and folks would have had to choose between whether they would come to Mark and Graham and the team for our day or go to another distillery on Isla. So it's always been tricky. So for the first time, we have our own dedicated day and we are closing Fèis Isle on the 6th of June. So we're kicking off with a few different things. We're launching our distillery cask exclusive, which is a new 18-year-old. So Mark, I've told you this evening, I am on a Jura 18 myself. So we have a new distillery edition that's coming out. So that's going to be very unusual. So that's bottled pretty clean. It's 57.1%. So really packing a punch, really interesting distillery exclusive from Graham Logan, our distillery manager. And then over the course of Sunday, there are a few different things. As it's Sunday, we are the day after a very big Fèis Isle event on Isla, so live online for folks to dial in. So after you've taken part in that huge celebration with those guys, you can join us for brunch. We have Bloody Marys with Stephen Martin and a whole load of things going on in the morning. And then through the afternoon, we're working with a really great guy who's based where I am in Glasgow called Andy Gemmell. And we've got some really interesting beer pairings going on. So if you're into beer pairing, Andy Gemmell is a genius for flavor-based selection. So Andy and our team will be taking us through that. And then later on the Sunday, we've also got some events going on with our distillery manager, Graham Logan. And what a year he has had. I think running a distillery on Jura is tough at the best of times, but he's going to be sharing some of the stories for how they've gone through the pandemic year and some of the things that are to look forward to on Jura moving forward. And that's it. It's going to be an exceptionally busy day, but it would be remiss of me not to give a shout out to our friend at Deer Island Rum Distillery, who have a small event going on as well. And also our friends right up at the top of the Jura, the Lusset Gin team are also doing online events. So over the course of that Sunday, you can't be with us. You can't get to Jura right now, but you can come online and enjoy a few drams and some great chat with the whole team.
And the Jura Festival bottling is available online or will be available online starting next week, right?
Yeah, so completely new for us. So Jura's, we've always had some really cracking whiskies available at the distillery, but it's a reward for making that journey. We haven't really been an active player in the online space, so really pleased to say that Mark, for anyone that follows Mark Bruce on Instagram, and if you don't, please do, but there's a lot of physical evidence of him bottling the distillery exclusive, doing the wax finishing right there on the island. But for the first time, that's going to be sold online on the 6th of June. And it's really nice because for us, Jura is a community that really comes, has kind of two lives in the year. So between the Fèis Festival and September is when we get lots of tourists normally coming. It's really alive with visitors. And then we close that season down with a fantastic Jura Music Festival. That's typically on something like the 25th of September. But clearly that's also been cancelled, as have whiskey festivals. So for the Islanders, the beginning of the season and the end of the season are marked by whiskey and music. And so what we're doing with our distillery exclusive is we're actually going to give a donation for every bottle sold in aid of the guys at the Jura Music Festival. Again, we're hoping that the Jura Music Festival will move online in September, so we'll still be able to give some great, cracking contemporary Scottish music online for audiences. But in reality, we're really going to be looking at next year before the Jura Music Festival comes back loud and proud as it always has been. And I think the distillery really sits at the heart of the two festivals. So for us to give a wee bit back with this distillery bottling felt like the right thing to do. And it looks like a cracking dram. I have not sampled it, Mark. You might get to do that before me, to be honest.
I hope so. Or at least I hope I get to sample it at all, because this year you can actually ship some to the U.S., right?
We
to at least
are
some
having,
states.
Yes, don't ask me which ones this week. So I think for all of us in Scotland, getting our product out of the country is the number 1, 2, and 3 challenge as we move forward. It's positive in the fact that we are still able to ship our product generally abroad, but when it comes to doing direct-to-consumer sales, when it comes to sending samples or anything outside of Scotland, it is a huge challenge. So yes, we are selling the distillery exclusive. We're intending to have it available in the majority of states in the US, and there'll be a list of that available on DuraWhisky.com.
All right. Have a good time next week with the virtual festival. Anything going on with Dalmore that we need to know about now that Greg Glass is the master whiskey maker and Richard is stepping back a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Dalmore and Dura and I guess the 4 kind of key things that Greg and Richard are focused on are Tamnavulin, Fettercairn, Dura, and Dalmore. Dalmore is still an exceptional whiskey to work on, right? I mean, I was telling you earlier, I was at the distillery working for a couple of weeks, and it's incredible the number of people that email or phone, or a lot of people just drive up, and it's entirely closed due to the restrictions that are in place. But we've got some fantastic things happening. We've got some really interesting whiskies that we have selected by hand. So Greg and Richard were working together and physically selecting antique casks from a very particular warehouse. And if anyone gets the chance to come, we are increasingly pointing out where this warehouse is. There's a particular warehouse at Dalmore where there are some more pioneering experiments going on in the back of place. And so what's happening now as Richard is stepping back and Greg is stepping forward is that together they're choosing these antique casks. We're at a really interesting point in the journey that Dalmore's going on. But Greg's very much leading whiskey making day to day. He is adding his own unique, very experimental flair. He's been in the business for about 5-6 years now. So really what Greg's been doing, you can see it on Fettercairn. If you want to get an example of how Greg is as a whiskey maker, look at Compass Box before, look at Dura and Fettercairn in the last 5 years, and what he's now doing on the Dalmore since Richard has just stepped back a little bit is really interesting. He's really challenging some of the things that we do in order to make sure that we continue to produce that great whiskey. So we've got some particular releases that when you see them come out in January, Mark, you will know these were the things that I was up the road for as Greg and Richard were choosing these particular casks. Dalmore's in a fantastic place, really. And just briefly, if I may, on Fettercairn, we're having another exceptional year with Stuart Walker, who is the distillery manager there, who's working with Greg. And actually, Fettercairn just feels like a brand that's been quietly sat there for decades, just producing this incredible whiskey. And since it was open to the public and completely relaunched a few years ago with Kirsty Beeston, who is the head of international malts for us, it's just completely taken its own life. And actually, if you're really into interesting whiskey and you want to find out more about how Greg Glass works as a whiskey maker, definitely start with Fettercairn. There's some really interesting things happening there. But again, coming back to the whiskey festivals, both these places, we would have had an agricultural fair at Fettercairn in, I think, August, where we would have been selling everything from hams and jams to whiskies. It's an incredible event. We're not doing that this year. The Highland Whiskey Festival, oh my word, what a shame. We all got together with Glenmorangie, with Diageo, with all of our friends in the Highlands to build a whiskey festival that we launched. We had 1 year and we've not had one since due to the global pandemic situation. So it's really challenging all of us in Scotland to think about how do we reach people, which is why I think what you guys are doing, WhiskyCast, is so important, because we clearly have to be getting online and telling more people more of our story, because you can't come and see us right now. And, God willing, that will be a situation that changes over time. But right now, it's all about online and starting with Dura on the 6th of June, which is a week on Sunday.
And we should point out that the pandemic is rearing its ugly head again, and lockdown restrictions were extended in Glasgow. You're based there. Give us the update. What have you heard today from Nicola?
It's been a really long year in Glasgow, and I'm fortunate to need to travel for work, but actually for my family, for my friends, and for the whole city, we have had the longest lockdown in phase one. We look like we're having the longest lockdown now, and the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon announced today that the Indian variant is very present in our figures, and their hypothesis is that that's what's driving the numbers up. Thank you for your comment about YouTube. Mark, it's very interesting seeing some of the comments that are coming up. We'll maybe pick up on them in a minute. I think the Glasgow situation is really serious. I guess for us as a global exporter, it's not just Glasgow. We work in Asia, and we're very fortunate to have a team in Asia that are really developing that whiskey market. China, Taiwan. I have said to you, Mark, in the year that we've had talking, is that I didn't see the same situation in a number of places. I didn't see the same situation in Cambodia or Taiwan or Thailand. And actually now, most markets that we talk to are having some kind of a COVID experience new. And I think it's really tough because it's hard to plan. And I think it's in all of our nature to think about, in a year, what do we do? So there's a friend that we share, Philippe Streiberg, is a blues musician and a whiskey writer. I promised him faithfully that this year I would be with him and seeing this whiskey festival on Islay. Not going to be happening. So I think whiskey festivals are a big part of how my brain programs my world. With COVID, I think all of us have other examples that are less frivolous, shall we say, and more real. And things like birthday celebrations or holidays or bar mitzvahs, all of that stuff's really hard. Liliana, my 9-year-old daughter, is 10 in a week, and it's like, well, now we're in lockdown in Glasgow. What do we do? How do we navigate that? But I think the UK situation is difficult, but feels under control. The really good news, is that our on-trade establishments are open. So we are still open in Glasgow, in Scotland, and more broadly in the UK. So that's fantastic. There are restrictions on where you can consume alcohol, which is obviously limiting the ability to make money. But actually, we are open. And Glasgow is a city of communities. So I'm a South Sider. I live in a very proud South Side suburb of Glasgow, and you get that community feeling coming back, probably for the first time. And that's fantastic. There are many more street cafes, many more outdoor food outlets. You see huge groups of people that are congregating, socially distanced, in the parks, on the Riverway, which is fantastic. And then just a final thought on Glasgow. We're the host for COP26 in November. So we're the host city for a hugely important environmental conference. And there was news this week that the council are planning for that to be going ahead. So that's the first kind of publicly available information about what the council in Glasgow are really thinking in terms of what's happening in November. So there's really positive signs in Glasgow looking forward. But for the next week, First Minister has asked us to just be patient whilst we ride this situation through. And I should point out here in New Jersey, the mask mandates officially went away as of today. That does not mean I will not stop wearing mine. It does not mean you should stop wearing yours if you're in New Jersey, but we got to be careful because I just have this sneaking suspicion that we are not done with this thing yet, and I hope we're not getting too optimistic too quickly here. Kieran Healey-Ryder, thanks for joining us tonight. Have fun with the Jura Virtual Whiskey Festival next Sunday. Once again, details are available at jurawhisky.com. Thanks for joining us, Kieran. Have a great weekend. Thanks for being here, Take care. Thank you.
That's Kieran Healey-Ryder from White & Mackay. And once again, the Jura Whiskey Festival, the virtual version, is next Sunday. They're extending Fagile one more day. If you keep building distilleries on Islay, pretty soon that thing is going to be about a 2-week-long affair. Joining us now, I believe you're in Islay, Mark, right?
Edinburgh.
You're in Edinburgh tonight, okay, because I know you have a home on Islay as well. But Mark Reynier, the managing director of Waterford Distillery, and thank you for agreeing to move up to this week. I know
Sure.
you had other stuff going on earlier tonight. You were going to join
That's
us
right.
next week. Colin Gordon, the manager at Ardbeg, was going to join us tonight, had a sudden conflict, and we'll have to postpone till next week. But thank you for coming in on short notice tonight, Mark. First of all, tell us what's going on where you are in Edinburgh as far as lockdowns and what's happening at the distillery in Waterford, Ireland.
Edinburgh here is certainly not in the same state as Glasgow. I think poor old Glasgow has had quite a tough time. But things are opening up here, and which is a good thing to see. It's been pretty sad to see such an empty city that relies on tourism and students. And when neither the students nor the tourism is here, it's a pretty empty place. So it's nice to see life coming back and the pubs opening up again, and people on the streets around again. So it's good to see. In Ireland, well, it's they've taken this very seriously. It's a very serious lockdown over there too. I haven't been to Waterford since last March. I haven't been able to go. But they're carrying on. We're distilling away. Nothing's stopped us producing. So no, and of course, as you know, we've launched the Waterford Whisky brand, and it couldn't have been more difficult to do that in a lockdown scenario. But we've done it, and here we are.
Almost as hard as launching a rum distillery in Grenada in the middle of a lockdown.
Christ! don't even start. I mean, that's just been a real nightmare because the two of the key pieces of kit. One is the mill, which comes from Brazil, and the biomass boiler, which comes from South Africa. And the two countries that have been severely restricted because of the virus have been Brazil and South America and South Africa. So the last two things to get completed, they've been sitting there waiting to be commissioned, are the mill and the biomass boiler. So that's happening now. We are distilling. We have been using a standby steam boiler, which we had the foresight to install. So the first rums we'll be bringing them to market in September. So
what is happening with Waterford? I got to admit, I love these bottle designs that you guys came up with the etching, and you can. I think you can maybe hear it here with the ridges on the glass.
Ribs for effect.
I know you guys have won some awards for this packaging, but I got to admit, this is with the blue glass is one of the best packaging, new whiskey packaging debuts I've seen in a long time. What's happening with your whiskeys?
Well, thank you very much. I think it is important. Blue, it's a sort of. I don't know if you can see that. It's a cobalt blue, which is happens to be the sort of color of the city of Waterford. But it also protects the whiskey. But bearing in mind it's natural, it's unchill filtered, and so it protects it a bit from ultraviolet light and shop lights, sunlight. And also it's not a whiskey color, and that's deliberate because we don't want people to associate. We don't want to go with the crowd. We want to stand out. We want to be do our own thing. The project's a very different project, and so we've got a bottle that does that. I don't know if you've seen underneath on the bottom there, our sort of mantra of terroir, traceable, and transparent is cut into the glass around the punt, which nailing colours to the mast. And then of course we have the Vinillock here on the top, so no cork to muck up our whiskey or to break or to put dust into the whiskey at all. Nice sort of clean glass, and then some lovely whiskey. There we go. So I'm going to pour mine.
What do you have? Which single farm origin do you have? I'm doing the
Hookhead.
Ballymorgan 1.1.
Yeah, Hookhead. I've got here.
And it's nice to know that you've completely just given up on the whole terroir thing, right? You've just decided, terroir doesn't really exist. We were just pulling your shit.
Yeah, exactly. The thing that makes me laugh is how the industry has had to move the goalposts all the time. Every time we prove something, the goalposts get moved, and then we have to prove that, and then the goalposts get moved again, and we have to prove that. But no, it's been great fun. As you know, we started terroir experiments at Bruichladdich, but we never really had the resources or the logistics to do it properly. And to be frank, we didn't actually have the buy-in from even our own, team to do it. It wasn't traditional enough, and we'll be laughed at and ridiculed and blah blah blah. But the little we did do when we first started, you knew you were onto something when you had these big farmers, Isla farmers. We brought them all together and gave them a sample of their own spirit that they had come from barley that they had grown. And you got them sort of, you listened to them arguing with each other about whose was better and whose was worse. And then well, hold on a second, how yours is so different? I saw you plant yours, I saw you sowed it, we sowed on the same day, so how come, well, your sand, it's sandier where you are, and mine, I've got a bit more peaty ground where I am. So that must be the reason why. So when you've got these farmers, rationalizing amongst themselves, there's something here. And so with Waterford, we had the chance to start from scratch, no baggage, no restrictions. We financed it to do this precisely this way. So, it was a definitive opportunity to do it properly once and for all. And that's what we've done. No stone left unturned. And so it revolves around our entrepot in Kilkenny, the Dalton brothers built for us, which is a sort of dedicated, we nicknamed it the cathedral because it's sort of got an ecclesiastical sort of feel to it. But, each of the farms that we distill, which is 40 different ones a year, has its own bin. So we can bring it from the farms, which is always the problem because everybody harvests at the same time. And there's moisture in the grain, and it's got to be dried really quickly to stop it rotting. So it's a race against time. And so we got 5,000 tons, whistling its way around all these country lanes. And we need to get it dried. So we have our own dedicated drying facility. So it's dried overnight, binned, and then safely binned until we call on it to be malted, which happens at Minch Malt at Athy, where we have the use of a dedicated Bobby malting plant. So we've got our own sort of malting facility, which allows
Wait a
us
second.
to...
What's a Bobby malting plant? I know Bobby Mills, but what's a Bobby malting plant? Unless it's run by a guy named Bobby.
Yeah, but no. Well, it might have been once. I don't know. But Bobby is an engineering company in East Anglia that was owned by Vickers, the guys that made the Hawker Hurricane and stuff. And funny enough, your previous guest, Jura, used to own Jura. Hawker Siddeley used to own Jura, Fettercairn, and Bruichladdich back in the 60s. And they owned the Bobby Engineering, and they've been making mills. I mean, if you go around a lot of the distilleries, Bruichladdich has a Bobby mill.
The Porteous Mills, yeah.
Well, I'm not sure if that's the same company or not, but I think Porteous is a different company. But Bobby is
Porteous did the Bobby Mills that because I remember the Vickers folks had some involvement with basically inheriting Porteous at one point.
Oh, they may have. You may be right. I don't know. I thought Bobby and Porteous were two separate companies.
Yeah, because it's the Bobby was the process, I thought, and I thought they were all sort of one big family that got put together. But I'd not heard the
that's probably
process.
quite right. No, that's probably quite right. They probably were amalgamated together. You're probably absolutely right. But I think they were two separate companies.
British consolidation of industries under Thatcher.
But no, this is pre. This is in the 60s. This is the Nadir post-war.
The Harold Wilson era.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry,
you're right. No, you're absolutely right. And one of the things they made was malting plants, and so they built a self-contained malting plant at Athy that had been mothballed, and it's basically it's two 45-ton steep tanks. And so this actually is quite relevant to our story, because each single farm unit is predicated on the Bobby malting. The deal we had with the maltsters was that they would get this plant going again, but we had to fill it. So it had to be full for operational efficiency. So that means each malting has to be 90 tons, 2 times 45, which therefore means that we need 130 tons from the farm, green. So by the time it's been dried and it ends up, and all the dust and bits and pieces, it ends that 130 tons ends up as being 90 when it goes into the Bobby maltings, and that delivers to us at the distillery 75 tons of malted barley. So we lose almost half the weight from the field to the time it gets to the distillery.
I have changed my opinion on terroir to a certain degree. Most of that was based on being devil's advocate and trying to punch holes in the theory. But I think you can, after tasting your stuff and tasting a couple of the other grain to glass distilleries that are around the world, like Frey Ranch in Nevada, where they grow all their own grain and things like that, I think you can have terroir. You just have to work really damn hard to get there, because you have to do, as you guys do, keep every farm
logistics
separate.
Yeah.
It's a pain in the neck to do.
Absolutely.
And you can't do it working through the commodity system, which 90% of distillers work through.
Absolutely.
So
right.
I think you can have it, but you really have to work at it to get there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and the point is, the concept exists, just for, anybody listening. Terroir, it's a funny French word.
Nobody's listening. It's okay. It's just us.
The problem is, there is
I'm
no
kidding.
English language translation that actually encapsulates what it's all about. So it's got an elitist French sort of connotation, but actually it's a very basic principle, which is that a plant is influenced, and your mother will know this. Everybody's every garden will know this. A plant is influenced by where it grows. And the impacts are things like the microclimate, the soil, the bedrock from which that soil is made, the subsoil, the topography, the altitude, the orientation, the exposure. All these things interplay together on the growth of the plant. What some people forget, they think, oh, it's a place, or it's a person, or it's a distance. No, it isn't. It's that three-dimensional impact on a plant, not a distillery, on a plant. And we know it from the French, from the vine. But the thought occurred, it occurred to me. Well, it doesn't stop there. It's any plant. Any plant is influenced by, your mother knows that, fuchsias grow on acid soil, or cacti on sandy soil, or, hydrangeas in humid soil. It's gardening, it's the same concept. It's just we've got this rather odd term, terroir, which seems to put the fear of God into some people. But it shouldn't. It's a very natural phenomenon, and it makes a lot of obvious common sense. So applying it to barley, well, okay, the plant grows on Islay, particularly in a very narrow window of opportunity, because it can't be sown until very late, sort of now almost, May. Whereas on Islay, in Waterford, 210 miles further south, we're on the same latitude as Cambridge, and with the Gulf Stream and warmer weather, down there we're sowing in March, and so obviously sowing so early, the adage is to have it in the ground before St. Patrick's Day. it ripens in July. Now on Islay, it's not ripening until September, and then you start getting into the autumn gales and the geese coming back from Greenland, that hoover it all up. So so for Islay, the Hebrides, it's a very, very narrow window of opportunity. So quite risky, really is risky. I followed the barley to Ireland. That's the sole reason I'm there. It's the best barley in the world. It's got fantastic conditions for growing it. Remember, that central plateau is sedimentary, so sandstone, limestone, with glacial drift on top and alluvial on top of that. So it's a very fertile place. And you've got the amelioration from the Gulf Stream, and a lot of sunlight in that southeast corner. So it really is a very, very good place to grow barley. So that Waterford is there because of the barley. And as I feel very strongly that whiskey's only got 3 raw ingredients, and one of those is water. Where does whiskey's flavor come from? It comes from the barley. That's what makes it the most flavor complex spirit in the world. It's the barley. So, hey, it's not rocket science to realize that that's where you need to go to do the best.
Okay, well, wait a second. Let me play devil's advocate again, because a lot of folks will say that 60 to 70% or more of the flavor and the color, of course, comes out of the wood. And Nurse Dave has this question. Hard to think grain variation can be tasted over barrel aging variation. And Chris Ratcliffe points out, good point, would the terroir be lost as maturation goes on and on? Go ahead and take those on. What about barrel aging, and can this
hold on a second. You're jumping the gun.
12-year-old Waterford?
You're jumping the gun. The first thing is it there in the barley? Well, we've proved that scientifically. We did a with the University of Oregon, Dr. Dustin Herb, and we did with the Irish Ministry of Agriculture, Chagas, and the Scotland's leading independent whiskey laboratory, a definitive study once and for all to prove to the critics that said, no, it doesn't exist. We do too many nasty things to barley for any terroir effect to ever possibly be present. So we did this over 3 years, and it was peer reviewed in February, and it's unequivocal that terroir, well, out of interest, what we discovered that there are over 2,000 flavor compounds in barley. And of those 2,000, the levels are so minuscule that the sensitivity of modern machinery can't, really identify them. But the main ones, the top 60, of those top 60, 60% of them were influenced by terroir. So, where that barley was grown. So that's, so there it is in the barley. Now, in the spirit, we laboratory malted, laboratory fermented, laboratory distilled in Scotland the barley that originated from these places in Ireland, and in that spirit, likewise, these terroir influences are present, are clear. So now everyone's moved the goalposts. It's all right. Okay. It exists in barley. It exists in spirit. Okay. Right. Okay. So now it can't possibly exist in barrel. Well, why not? I mean, that's the most crazy idea possible.
Can it survive the barrel? That's what I think what people are asking is, can it survive the barrel? Because the barrels come from all over the place.
Let's take it back away. If you put neutral spirit in a barrel, do you get whiskey?
No.
Quite. You get a bitter,
you get aged
tannic,
vodka,
undrinkable, thing. Fine, yeah. So what's going on in the barrel? The barrel is a container, sure. It has been used since the Romans. At times they realized that it was good for putting stuff in. Assuming the wood is fresh, and that's a big assuming, because a lot of the whiskey barrels, as you have seen and you know very well, are not fresh. They've been overused, and so they're devoid of a lot of their original characteristics. Assuming the barrels are fresh, the spirit, when you put into it, the higher the strength, the more it extracts, and it extracts primarily the compound group of lignin, vanillin, and tannin. And this is where we get our color from. We don't add it with E150 or caramel or Pax Red or whatever. It comes from the use of virgin oak and the extraction of those compounds, which gives us the color of our whiskey.
Hey, Mark, hang on, take a breath for just a second, because there's a comment that came in from Laura Young on Facebook that I need to address real quickly. Subtitles are getting a little off-putting. Some of them are pretty questionable. I need to address this only because I suspect what you're referring to is the captions that are coming across on Facebook for what we're talking about, where that's automated closed captioning that we have no control over at this end. And it's basically Facebook's algorithm doing closed captioning and trying to interpret what we're saying and putting it into text on the bottom of your screen. It's not the comments. I don't believe Laura's addressing the comments that we've been posting at the bottom of the screen from our audience, but the closed captioning subtitles. And we have no control over that on Facebook. So I just wanted to address that. So please go ahead, Mark.
You're right. Okay. So what then happens in a barrel with the spirit is a micro-oxygenation of the flavor compounds that entered that barrel in the first, in the spirit that you put in. So the more flavor compounds spirit you put in at the beginning, the more you'll get out at the end. If you don't put the flavor compounds in at the beginning, you won't get them at the end. It is very simple. So the micro-oxygenation, as you all know, the angels share, the spirit that disappears, but it's replaced by air, and through the wood, and that air is reacting with those flavor compounds and ameliorating them into what we associate as maturity. That's why we like maturing things, whether it's wine or whiskey. It's that micro-oxygenation of the flavor compound. If it was too fast, it would be detrimental. If it was too slow, well, we wouldn't bother. So it's the flavor compounds in the spirit in the first place. So there they are. There's over 2,000 of them. 60% we know of the main ones are influenced by the terroir. So those flavor compounds are there. They ain't going anywhere. They're there, and they're just going to be ameliorated by the micro-oxygenation into maturer versions of themselves. Now, we don't know, and we're working on this, when we'll have an answer for you, actually how those flavor compounds, do they start to, we know from the beginning that those 2,000 aren't linear. You don't just take, this is flavor A and this is flavor B, that's oranges, that's apples, that's pears, because they interact together to disguise compounds, flavors, and also to create new ones. And this is very poorly understood. We just don't have the understanding of it. I'm not saying we, I mean science just generally doesn't understand it. So we could extrapolate that in the barrel, that we don't know how, going forward, those initial flavor compounds, as they are ameliorated by maturation, do they carry on disguising and augmenting? We don't know. So it'd be quite interesting to find out. So we've got a study in place to do that. So that will be the next. Will be the paper after next. We've got one paper coming out next year. We've got another one, this particular subject, coming out the year after that. Because I find it fascinating as to what happens. Because I think the barrel is so, we know how important barrels are, but I think that facile phrase, that old nugget that gets whacked out all the time. 80% of a whiskey's flavor comes from the wood. Well, it's just not true. It would be more honest to say that 100% of a whiskey's flavor is influenced by its time in wood. Yeah, I'd go with that. But to say that a whiskey's flavor, why bother with barley in the first place then? Why not just use, corn or industrial alcohol and stick it in some barrel if the whiskey's flavor comes from the barrel? Do you see how absurd that statement is? So I think it's been corrupted and it's been recycled, and I personally think it's used as an excuse for why are we finishing this and finishing that and finishing what the other? Well, it's because that's where the whiskey's flavor comes from. Well, that's a sort of nihilistic sort of surely end sum game, which is saying that, well, actually our whiskey's got no flavor in it, so we're going to put it into some funky barrels, and that will make it drinkable or marketable. I think that's a pretty sad sad idea if that's where we're going.
I have to ask, Mark, when you and Jim McEwen were having arguments about this stuff, how long did they last before one of you took a breath and the other person could get a word in edgewise? Who won those arguments? Because I kid about this because Jim was always one of my favorite interviews because Jim could go on for 5-10 minutes after one question. And I know you can do that just as well. So who the hell ever got a word in edgewise between the two of you?
Neither. Yeah, it didn't happen. Yeah.
Hey, Bobby Miller, who is an Irish tillage farmer, wanted to thank you for promoting the use of Irish grain, but he wants to know your thoughts on the protected geographical indicator status of Irish whiskey that doesn't include any insistence on the use of Irish grain in Irish whiskey in those technical files.
Well, nor does it in Scotland. So I think personally, I think it should be. I mean, as you know, at Bruichladdich, one of the first things I did was insist that we only use Scottish barley, and then we took it a step further and tried to use exclusively Islay barley. But physically, it's impossible to do that. We were using all the available arable ground on Islay, and still we were getting barely half of our total requirement. And as I said earlier, it was a pretty it would be too vulnerable to have done everything, even if we could. But no, I firmly believe, in France, if you buy a bottle of Alsace wine, the grapes come from Chile. It comes from Alsace. Burgundy comes from Burgundy. So it says Scotch whiskey, it says Irish whiskey. It should come from Scotland and it should come from Ireland. I think that's a really basic thing, and yet it won't happen because of the big companies that control the industry and their supply arrangements, which have increasingly come from overseas, overseas barley mixed with indigenous barley, and suddenly, hey presto, it becomes Scottish barley or Irish barley. The tricks that are going on, I think are naughty, but they've always gone on. So no, I think that there needs to be some very simple. And I can remember the SWA sitting on in my office on Islay. When I mentioned this to them, and they said, "Well, I can tell you for one thing, it will never happen." And I think that's really sad because Scotland can produce the right amount of distilling quality barley. The trouble is, it all goes to Japan, and I think that's I don't know. You will read into that what you will. And of course, it's all part of how barley has been propagated over the last 50 years. Increasing the yield off the field, increasing the disease resistance, increasing the climate adaptability, so that you can grow it in ever wider regions, zones. So now, a lot comes from, Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Australia. And I've always thought that was slightly sad that, something that grew so well in Scotland and Ireland, and now it basically grows anywhere in the world. And of course, that keeps the price down, which is what it's all about. And commodity provisioning, I understand. Big distillers need reliability. They need, the value of and forward planning of those sort of resources. I fully understand that. But I just, somehow still feel that if Scotland can produce that quality and that volume, at least for single malt whiskey, why can that not be the case? And the same in Ireland. Why can't, there's plenty of capacity for malting, distilling quality barley in Ireland. So why can't it be part of that case? I think it's a very good point.
Question from Chris Ratcliffe. And of course, your longtime running buddy, Jim McEwen, officially retired last Sunday. This time, I think it's number 3 is retirement now. Yes. But in his last chat last weekend, said Bruichladdich was in a right state when it was purchased. What's your memory of what you guys got yourselves into back in 2001 and 2000 when you got the distillery, and what was needed to recommission it besides the genius of the late, great Duncan McGillivray?
Well, he was the person, as a great engineer, a farming, crofting family. The guy, in life you come across, rarely but every now and again you come across somebody with whom you feel empathy, and your life has been enriched by meeting that person. And I'm Duncan for me is one of those guys. I just absolutely love the man. And he was able to, so when we bought the distillery, it had been shut for 5 years, I think it was, shut down. There were weeds growing out of it. It was in a pretty poor state. It had suffered from lack of interest from White Mackay. Before it shut down, it had only been performing. The team at Jura would come over and distill at Bruichladdich, and then they'd go back to. So it was a very haphazard affair. And so really, it had been sort of pretty much shut for a hell of a lot longer than the previous 5 or 6 years, and certainly the lack of investment in it. But the key point was it was a Victorian-built distillery. It was built in 1881, along with Bunnahabhain, as a state-of-the-art distillery. Up to that point, the distillery in Islay had been farms or mills that had been co-opted into distilling and improved and enlarged. But the first purpose-built distilleries were in 1881. Because the changing point was this the ability to import barley into Islay and import coal into Islay, which is 3 times more effective than peat calorifically. So the economics changed, and so the limiting factor up to that point, there were 22 farm distilleries on Islay at that point, was the ability to grow barley. The actual land was there wasn't enough to grow any further. So something had to change. And so it took a while, but in 1881, the puffer, the steam ship that could land with a flat bottom on the beach and unload barley and coal was a game changer. And that allowed the distilleries to get bigger, and which is what happened. So remember, it was a state-of-the-art distillery. It was very cleverly designed, very simply, but very cleverly. In fact, 2 or 3 elements of the design ended up being incorporated throughout the rest of the whiskey industry. And the testament was that when 2001, when we came along and were faced with putting it back into operation, was that the simplicity of the design, the solidness of the machinery, the cast iron mash tun, the gravity feed, it was actually relatively simple to do. There weren't any microchips, there weren't any complicated bits. It was good, solid Victorian engineering, and so Duncan, with his agricultural upbringing, it was the same sort of engineering. So it wasn't really that difficult. It took us what 6 months, 5 months to do it.
I'm curious about your use of the term microchips. Wouldn't that be microcrisps in the UK?
Yeah, right. Okay.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Yeah.
Dave Kuhn, question for you. Dave is an enormous fan of the influence of Vin de Naturel casks on whiskey. What makes Vin de Naturel casks so copacetic for maturation?
Well, VDN, it's an acronym for Vin du Naturel, which means sweet wine, natural sweet wine. And it's a technique of manufacture. We would also you could call it fortified wine, where the fermentation is arrested by the addition of alcohol, which kills the yeast and stops them eating any more sugar. So it leaves residual sugar. So you end up with a 15% alcohol wine, but with natural sugar still in it. So sherry, port, Madeira, Banyuls, Morey, Marsala, Moscato, all these are fortified wines, or Vin du Naturel, VDN. So it's just a term that I coined. Now the wines, as part of their manufacture process, the barrels aren't changed. The barrels are merely containers. The barrel has very little extractive influence, and so the wood is essentially inert, but the barrels have been impregnated with sugar for 10, 20, 30 years. So you put alcohol in there and it just sucks out of the wood all that sugar. So the VDNs we use as part of a compote of barrels for each single farm. Each single farm goes into the same proportion of barrels, and the VDNs provide that richness, that roundness, so that when Ned is putting together a bottling, he has those VDN barrels to call on to provide a roundness to the bottling. It compensates for the virgin American, the virgin French, the first fill American, the first fill French. I can't hear you. Can anybody else hear you? I can't hear you, Mark. Yeah, I can't hear you either. Shall I go out? Can you hear me, Mark?
Wait a second. How about that? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I was going to say was that Ned Gahan, for those who are not aware, is your head distiller.
Yes.
And for those who are not aware, that's where I wanted to go with that, was just to interrupt and say that Ned Gahan is the guy who actually makes the whiskey.
Yeah.
Along with your team there, but he leads the team on a day-to-day basis, and I want to give him the credit he deserves.
Yeah, well, absolutely. He's the head distiller. Yeah.
Go ahead.
What was
finish
that apropos of? I can't remember what we were talking about. What happened? Where did we leave
We were
that?
talking about VDN casks, and you were talking about what Ned has to do when Ned is creating spirit.
Yeah, exactly. So we use a proportion of barrels, the same proportion for each farm. So each farm gives us 200 barrels. We use virgin French from the Limousin forest and the virgin American from Ozarks. That gives us the color and the vanillainess from the American oak, the grilled toast flavors from the French oak, and that's about 20%, and then 40% are first fill American ex-bourbon barrels, which gives us that little sort of creme brulee type flavor, and then about 20% are 25% or so are first fill French oak from a number of forests, the Vosges Mountains at altitude, Allier, Trancé, which gives different density of grain. And then the remaining, whatever it is, 10% or so is VDN, and then a little small percentage, 2% of exotics, is what we call exotics, oak from different places. So each farm has the same mix. So the VDNs may be for Hookhead, maybe sherry and port, but the VDNs for Bannow Island, for example, maybe from Masala or whatever. But that's all of this detail is available on. If you put the terroir code here, the terroir code into our website, and you can find out all the details you need on every single cask that's used is put up there. Plus, all the times, the hours, the 130 hours, the 140 hours of extended fermentation, which is very important. It's back to the barley again. That's where the flavor is, liberating the flavor from the barley via our troika of the hydro mill and the incremental mash converter and the mash filter, which is our super premium terroir extraction unit. I hasten to add, it was put there by Diageo, and it was for brewing, but boy, does it make an awful good terroir extractor. So we've got a unique setup for terroir extraction.
So you're pulling the terroir out of the whiskey then?
You're liberating it. You're liberating. Obviously, the barley you got to mill it.
This isn't that doohickey that Diageo had in the place that they were using to pull all the alcohol out of the Guinness they were making there that they were sending down to Africa, right? As syrup.
Yeah, that's right. Apparently. No, that's an evaporator. We've got an evaporator, but we don't use it. If we did, we'd use it to evaporate our pot ale, but we don't need to, so we don't. No. What I'm talking about is to access the barley and its flavor compounds, you need to mill it, as you know, but we hydro mill it, the only one in existence in the world. So it mills it underwater, anaerobically, to protect its purity. So it's underwater milled with titanium plates. So it's extremely finely milled. And then it goes into a mash converter, incremental mash converter, not a mash tun, a mash converter. The traditional method is you put it in a mash tun and you put water through it and it percolates through and takes the sugars with it. It's a percolation in effect. We do the opposite. It's hydro milled. The water and the grist, which is 100% milled, not partitioned, goes into the incremental mash converter, and the whole thing is heated up. And the point of that is... Wait a
second. Wait. Okay, you have blown my mind here, Mark, because... Okay, the whole idea behind malting barley is to get it wet, let it germinate, then dry it, and then mill it, and you guys are putting it back into water to mill it? Doesn't that restart the germination process?
No, because the germination process has been stopped by malting.
Okay. So it doesn't restart.
No, because it's been through malting, so germination has been arrested by desiccation, part of the malting process. So it's stopped. Okay, so it's hard.
Yeah.
It's crispy. So we're now milling it between two titanium plates. So not a roller mill or a hammer mill. It's ultra mill, very tight. So we're not looking for that mixture of solids, flour, and husks. You know that thing everybody shows you with the little shaky thing.
Yeah.
We don't need to do that because we're not percolating water through it.
I love your description of the little shaky thing we always see on the distillery tour.
Yeah, exactly. So this is 100% complete milling, bang, underwater. So the vessel, the ton, the incremental mash converter fills with water and just really fine pieces of barley, and then the whole unit is heated up incrementally. And what does that mean? What it means is where those enzymes are that are going to convert the starch into sugar, and we don't know where they are. They're in there, but we don't know at what temperature they're going to be activated. Because remember, each barley from different farms, grown differently, is going to produce a different result. Not least the harvest. So we don't really know where those enzyme temperatures are going to be. So by incrementally heating it up, they activate the enzymes wherever that is to get the conversion of starch into sugar. So again, you couldn't design a better vessel for what we're doing, but it was accidental. It was there, So incremental mash conversion is extremely, but we still have that mix of water and the grist. So that then gets put through a mash filter. Now those are relatively common in large breweries, and it's a series of 54 pneumatic presses. Think of it like a giant tea bag. Where the grist the tea bag is being inflated against the grist, which squeezes it pneumatically. So terroir extraction maximum, because you're squeezing every last drop out of it. Again, you couldn't design it better if you're trying to do what we're trying to do. So we've basically repurposed this brewing, this unique operation, into terroir extraction. It's if we hadn't designed it or thought of it ourselves, you couldn't come up with a better thing. So and that gives us the the total terroir, which in the wort can now go to fermentation, which is the most important part of the process. And I think this is something that I would disagree with a lot of your the whiskey people who, everybody thinks about stills and they think about the iconic photograph of the stills, the copper. This is what it's all about. Distilling. This is we see all those photographs. Or you never see a photograph of fermentation. Never. No one even talks about it.
Because it's not photogenic. It's
boring.
Bubbly.
Yes, exactly. And yet, that's where the flavor is being made. That's where the flavor from the barley has finally been liberated. There it all is. It's the most important thing. So, borrowing from the wine world, in Burgundy in the 80s, where they learned about extended fermentation. Instead of letting fermentation go off like a rocket, yeast eats sugar, creates CO2, creates alcohol, and creates heat. And the faster it happens, the more heat, the more bubbles, the more gas. It's called a volatile fermentation. And big distilling wants this to go through quickly, and so that's what happens. But if you cool the fermentation, by cooling it, by putting a lid on it, you extend the time of the fermentation. It's a calm fermentation. You get purity and you get intensity of flavor as a result. We knew this from the wine world. So all I'm doing is applying that same logic. So our fermentations will last the best part of a week, which you could argue is 7 times longer than some, probably at least 2 or 3 times longer than some, because we get more purity and intensity of flavor. And we can do that thanks to Diageo again, because we have thermoregulated fermentation vessels. They're not pretty, they're not wood, they're not those wonderful ones that we used to have at Bruichladdich, which I absolutely adored. But it allows us to extend the fermentation for this purpose, something I've always wanted to do. Then,
so we have a question from Connor O'Hare. Could you use unmalted barley in your mash converter?
I suppose you could. I wouldn't want to, but I suppose you could.
Why wouldn't you want to?
Well, I don't want to make pot still style whiskey.
Okay.
Why would you when you're making the best anyhow? Single malt whiskey from malted barley. Why?
Oh, you are starting trouble tonight. There's going to be guys with pitchforks and torches outside Waterford Distillery after this.
Well, no, the funny thing that makes me laugh is when I first started at Waterford, a guy came to see me. He said, "You've got to make pot still whiskey." And for those that don't know, pot still whiskey we all, single malt whiskey is obviously made in a pot still, but this is a style of whiskey that's been co-opted by Irish distillers as their own, that all Irish whiskey should be made as pot still, which is a mixed mash of malted barley, and I would say diluted with unmalted barley, green barley, and to a certain extent other cereals, wheat and oats in various proportions. And I think that's all very sweet. Plenty of people can do that. That's absolutely fine. You carry on doing that. But I don't want to do that. I know about barley, and I firmly believe that that's where it's at, and that's what I want to do. But this guy, he said, no, you got to do. And I said, well, look, go and buy your own bloody distillery. This is what we're going to do. This is our distillery. This is my distillery. This is the way we're going to do it. So that was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and I'm surprised if anybody isn't aware of my opinion on that, because we're making.
Oh, you've not been shy about sharing your opinion on this, Mark. I think we're pretty much clear on that one.
Yeah, but don't you think it's slightly absurd if I came round to your house and told you how to, keep your house in order? It's pretty bloody annoying if you ask me.
Yeah. Okay.
Go and build your own.
I've got a great comment from Dave Kuhn here, and I want to get to this because I want to talk about your new cuvee release that's coming out. Dave thinks we should start using the term gestalt in whiskey next. As a designer, gestalt is the sum of parts, and the in-house blending of single malts have a certain character to the gestalt. Now, your next cuvee release is coming out fairly soon, and this is a blend of all those single farm estates, right?
Well, funny enough, that's actually almost the text off the back label, what you just read out.
Hey, Dave typed it in. He may have seen the text. I haven't seen your label yet.
Gestalt is on the is in the text there.
I haven't seen that yet. Dave is psychic. We were faced with this issue that if you apply for label approval in America, everybody knows what you're doing. And we wanted to keep this secret for as long as we could. But then it came to the point where we were going to have to, it would be found out by applying to the firearms and tobacco. So we've announced or released the label details, and yes, it's the culmination of the next step of our project. A lot of people think that the single farm origins is the be all and end all, and actually it's just the beginning. The single farm origins provides us with a library of maturing spirit, of uber individuality,
We talked about 40 farms a year. We've done in total almost 100 different farms. So we have an extraordinary library of maturing spirit, and all Waterford single malt whiskey. But the aim has always been to create the most profound single malt possible. And to do that, I was influenced very heavily by the French, two people in particular, and one of them being Remy Krug in Champagne. And Remy Krug, I remember him telling me that, to make the vintage Krug, it hasn't got a great deal to do with him. It's the good Lord who decides on the quality of the wine. But he said, when it comes to the cuvée, I'm the good Lord. And what he meant by that was that he's in charge of how it gets put together. And so, a myriad of different individual Krug wines from different parts of the area, the Champagne area, different varieties of grapes, each with their own individual characteristics, are assembled together to create the Grand Cuvée, which is how they produce such a complex wine and are able to do it, year in, year out. So, another example of that is in Bordeaux, which, it's if you went to a great chef, a Michelin restaurant chef, and you said to him, well, how do you make your great meals, your great dishes? And what he won't say is, I go to the cupboard, I take everything out of the cupboard, I put it in a big pot, and then I put it in a bottle, and then there you go. That's not how he does it. What he does is he takes various different individual ingredients and cooks them and prepares them separately, and then only finally at the last minute assembles them together, each bit with its own contributing flavor, to create the dish that he's trying to assemble. So it's the same thing. This is what the great chateaux in Bordeaux do. The Grand Vin of Chateau Latour or Lafite or Margaux or Haut-Brion. The complexity is obtained not by mixing all the grapes up and making just one big, wine. On the contrary, they cultivate separately, according to the terroir of the estate, the different varieties on their best optimized terroir. They are harvested separately. They are harvested separately. They are vinified separately. They are put into barrel separately. They are separate individual wines, single farm origins. They are separate wine. They are then assembled together to create the mindfuck that is the big wine. And that's exactly, for the first time, what we are doing first time in whiskey, as far as I'm aware, doing with Waterford Whisky. We are bringing together, I think this first one, Ned is bringing together 25 single farm origins, each with their own identity. We can see it scientifically, analytically, we can taste it, but they're bringing them together to create the most, we hope, the most complex, the most profound single malt whiskey that it is humanly possible to prepare. Now, I hope it's going to be the best, but it may not be, but it certainly will be the most profound. And of course, this is early days for us. We've only been distilling for, since 2016. Our spirits are still young, but if we're winning all these prizes at this stage with this youth, I think it augurs terribly well for the future. As each year, and remember, we've distilled enough whiskey to allow us to up front to dip into these early years and not prevent maturation going on. So these early distillates will still be able to visit in 5, 10, 20 years time. So again, I think it's one of those things that new distilleries often lack, is the ability to distill enough spirit at the beginning And we certainly had this problem at Bruichladdich, and I know others have had, that you dip into that first year again and again and again, and then it's all gone, and then the next year, and it never, you never get beyond, very young years, because you're constantly dipping in to those inadequate stocks of those first years. So I resolved at Waterford not to have that problem. So we've been distilling 1 million litres from day one. So, we've got no shortage of maturing whiskey. And that means to the consumer, if you're interested, that we can revisit and follow these years and see ourselves, all of us, how that spirit matures. So when your guy says, well, what happens to it in barrel? Well, let's watch. Why not? Because we can, and we can show you. This is what I find very liberating, is that any of these questions, whether they are designed to be slightly cheeky, or whether they're actually genuine or whatever.
They're genuine with a bit of cheekiness involved.
Yeah, but we can all watch. We can watch. You can see for yourself.
And it was great because the timing of this was perfect, because yesterday when we were talking about having you move up from next week to this week, I get an email from your PR person talking about Leah Hewson and the artwork that's been created for the Cuvée bottle.
Yeah. Oh,
I think this is friggin' fantastic. I think that's just absolutely fantastic. Tell me about this, because I was gobsmacked when I saw this.
We call that the woo-woo. So Leah is a Dublin-based graphic designer, and we asked her to create an image for us that sort of reflected this idea of bringing together. And you use the word blend, and I think that's a loaded term, because we all know what a blend is, and it isn't what we're doing. Which is an assemblage, a bringing together of single farm origins, all of which are Waterford single malt whiskies. So it's an assemblage of Waterford single malt whiskies. So we wanted an image that sort of gave that image of different components coming together. And again, we wanted something that wasn't normal. Because this approach isn't normal.
Well, nothing you guys do is normal, and I think you like it that way.
Yeah, that's the whole label, by the way.
Yeah, I love this, and Leah Hewson is a whiskey geek too, right?
Yeah. Well, she is now.
Well, I saw on the bio that she was into it before, so even then, this was. I mean. I think this is really cool. I mean, this is a piece I would hang this on my wall. It's better than just a whiskey label. It's a legitimate piece of artwork here. Well,
we're gonna make some artist prints of it. I think we're gonna do 100 artist prints, and then we'll do some posters too, for everybody. But the artist prints, we'll probably do those on our new website. So keep your eyes on that.
So we've got questions. When is this going to be out? How much will it be? And I'm assuming it's coming to the U.S. I haven't talked with Raj Saberwal, your U.S. importer.
It'll be the same price as the single farm origins, and it'll come out in September.
Okay. Now,
and the point is, we will be able to run with this initial cuvee for a good 18 months. So it's something that people can get behind and buy. One of the problems we had, in the old days at Bruichladdich is we never had, particularly in America, we never had a definitive version, which made it very difficult for distribution, in the 50 states of America. So this is one of our answers of dealing with that, which is providing the individuality of this cuvee, this mindfuck concept, which we can do in by using all these single farm origins to create a volume that is viable with the states in mind.
Let's go back to the history of Waterford, because you moved over the two stills, one that was out in front of Bruichladdich that you guys had salvaged, and we've told this story before, from Inverleven. And the other one that was in storage that was going to be used for Port Charlotte. Have you had a chance to compare the whiskey that's been produced that in those Inverleven stills from Dumbarton and what you guys have created at Waterford? And this is a question from Grant Fraser. I think it's a great question.
Well, it is. It's a good question. Well, I knew already from Inverleven spirit. There's not much of it around. I think Caden had some bottlings, and Gordon MacPhail had some. And that was from back in the early 70s, because it was shut down, not very long after, which is why the stills were still usable, because they hadn't actually been used very much. Although, they were built in 1974, they hadn't actually been given, seen much action. And all you have to do, we were talking about the stills. We hadn't got to the stills, the distillation part at Waterford. But I think that when you talk about distilling, and of course, people love to say about the alchemy and all the romance and everything. But really, it's about the middle cut, how greedy you are with that middle cut, and where that middle cut comes from, and the rate at which you take it. So if you take that middle cut at a slow rate, and we take it at sort of between around about 320, 340 liters per hour, it's a trickle distillation, and it gives you that viscosity, that richness. And then that floating middle cut, which is dependent, it's like a pontoon. If that pontoon, half the day, if it was fixed, half the day you'd be underwater, and the other half of the day you'd be in midair. So it needs to float, because we're dealing with 40 different barley origins. And so we have fixed it at 10 degrees of cut. So we're not infringing on the heads or the tails. We're in fact leaving, we've calculated roughly 50,000 liters of alcohol that we could take, that we don't take, we choose not to amplify the purity of the spirit. So we're not doing this for to make the cheapest liter of alcohol possible. That's never been our goal, is to make the finest liter of alcohol possible. So that 10 degrees is the fixed bit, and it floats. I don't think anybody's accused you of trying to cut corners here, because
the way you guys have done this is the most expensive damn way to produce whiskey I've ever seen.
Absolutely. And it's thanks to Diageo, because all the kit's there, and all the sensors, and all the ability to monitor what you're doing. We're just repurposing that monitoring, which was all for efficiency, and turning it into, well, what the hell's happening and when, so that we can apply that 10 that margin to each.
For those who do not know the origin story of Waterford, Mark, let's take a break and explain this, because what you're using is the old Guinness brewery in Waterford that Diageo deemed surplus to needs, that they had overbuilt with all sorts of technology, everything except the stills that you brought over from Inverleven.
We've got to answer that question.
Let's explain this, because before we keep giving them too much credit.
Right. Okay. So it's two breweries. It's two breweries. One brewery from 1792. And then the other side of the street is the modern one, which was built in 2004, 40 million euros. And it was built to produce Guinness, and Guinness particularly for export. And then in 2014, it was shut down, a decade after it was built, as brewing was consolidated in St. James's Gate in Dublin. And so here was this riverside, state-of-the-art brewery. And as you know, brewing is half of distilling. And as far as I'm concerned, it's probably the most important half. And so, bringing the stills, bringing the was relatively easy. And we had those stills that we stole from allied distillers when they were dismantling the Dumbarton site. It's now housing, I think. And we were tipped off by the demolition guy in charge, a guy we now call Demolition Dave, who coincidentally is a shareholder
One of your
in
investors.
Distillery. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So what goes around comes around. And so that's, you know, when we liberated all those bits and pieces from the Inverleven and used them as spare parts for Bruichladdich for the best part of a decade. And those stills we took to Waterford. And so going back to the original question, we sort of I knew what sort of spirit they would give, because by sort of 1880, 1890, everybody knew what the optimum shape was for stills. You know, the progression from clandestine stills to shoehorned into a stable stills that you can.
What? Wait a second. By 1880, then why the hell did every damn distillery in Scotland have different shaped stills?
Since when?
If we knew what produced the best spirit, how come we got Glenmorangie with giraffe neck stills, Ardbeg with little short dumpy stills, Old Pulteney with the cutoff stills?
I just said, Mark. At Lefroy, you still see the same size stills, the ones that were shoehorned into the stables.
Yeah.
It's like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. You see one big one, and then sort of like 6 little ones, which are exact replicas of the original ones, right? So it's not difficult. I didn't see what your problem is.
Well, because if we knew what produced the best spirit, then why didn't everybody in distilling in Scotland after 1880 use the same shape of still?
Well, not 88, it was 1900. There were things like Dumbarton, Inverleven stills, experimental stills. There were, the bulbs, the neck bulbs that people experimented with back in 1815. So they carry them on, sure. But if you bought a new still, if you went to Forsyth's and ordered a new set of stills, what shape do you think you'd get? Let me put it back to you. What shape do you think they would give you? What shape do you think they would recommend? And it isn't
be big in
any
the
of those.
butt and narrow at the top, and then in between
Correct.
would be whatever you wanted it to be.
Thank you. Exactly. Well, no,
but it would be whatever you wanted it to be, whether it's a boil ball in the middle or what.
Sure. Yes, sure. Whatever you wanted. But what would the recommendation be? And all these things tried and tested. Yeah, whoever did it hanged on to it. Sure. But the general consensus is that a still is that's an onion form with the OJ and then up to with a relatively tall neck, because it's well known that the vapor has to work to get up the top, to get the pure flavors, to get the literally more refined spirit that we associate today. The older shaped stills have shorter necks, or they have those reefed bulbs trying to compensate for the same thing, to try and get, so the older ones have shorter necks, so they are literally less refined, which is one of the reasons, for example, Lefroy gives you that sort of iodine flavor. It's not the peat that does it, it's the short neck of the still. Then you got, if you go next door to Ardbeg, where they've always had this bowl, this reflux bowl. The idea was to have a short still that you'd shoehorn into your buyer, but the thinking being, well, hold on a second, how do we increase that refinement? And so they came up with that idea. But then today, 200 years later, that's all history. If you go and want to build a distillery now, they're not going to recommend those shapes, because we know now that tall necks, relatively narrow, where the vapor has to rise reflux back into the bowl to be redistilled, and each time getting literally more refined until it's light enough to get up into the condenser. And that produces a more refined, and I'm not saying better necessarily, but more refined spirit. It is literally a more refined spirit in the technical term. So we know that distillery still design hasn't really advanced very much since 1890, 1900. It's all sealed, signed and sealed. It's well known, it's well understood. So 1974, 74 years later, not a great advance in still shapes. We know it's going to be floral. We know it's going to be a refined spirit. It's no surprise. And that's exactly what it is. And funny enough, we're replacing the stills this July because having flogged them quite hard in the last 5 years, they're beginning to leak a bit. So we're replacing them like for like, as distilleries always do, like for like.
I thought it was because you finally got tired of that aftertaste from Duncan's welly boots that had been in the top for all those years at Bruichladdich.
Very funny, Mark. Very funny. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. Hey, how's Rory doing these days?
So in fact, that's what we're going to do. Is we're going to take the stills out and put them up on the lawn, and we were looking for those boots to stick back in homage to Duncan. So we've got them somewhere. So we'll find them.
How's Rory doing, your boy?
Well, he's meant to be at university, but of course that's not happening. So I've seen him quite a lot. I wasn't
but he's old enough to drink now, right? He's old enough to actually share this whiskey with you that you've been making.
Yeah,
I remember when he was there. I remember when he was. I remember
pretty good
when you turned the actual still at Waterford, and he actually handled it.
Yeah.
Has he tasted this stuff yet? Have you started jamming with him yet?
Funny you should say that, but yes, in fact, he is pretty good at it. He's pretty good at it.
Yeah?
He's got a very good palate. He's always had a very good palate. He's always had a very good palate. So whether it's wine or whiskey, and he loves whiskey. So we dram often together, and I have to say, Mark, it is a very satisfying feeling. Having a grown-up dram with your boy, and particularly since he christened Bruichladdich as a 5-month-old baby. He christened Waterford, and he's done the hat trick. He christened Grenada as well.
And I love that because my daughters are old enough now that I can actually have drams with them, so I know exactly where you're coming from, and. That is really cool. I'm really glad to hear that despite the pandemic, because if it hadn't been for the pandemic, he'd have been off at university and you wouldn't be dramming with him.
Yeah, sometimes I wish he was at university, but no, you're right. It's and I think it's when I was that age, would I have drunk whiskey? No, I'd have gone nowhere near it. I was telling someone earlier on today, when I was when I started my wine company in '85, we weren't going to stock any whiskey because I never drank it. My generation, nobody knew about single malt whiskey and blended whiskey, which was the only whiskey anybody knew. That's what your parents drank. That was whiskey mac, whiskey sour, whiskey. All those sort of old Buffton Tufton things.
Chivas 18 was what Chivas Regal was. What I remember buying a Chivas Regal mirror for my dad to hang behind his bar at home.
So people forget how new this single malt whiskey really is. It really started, in my view, around about 1985. There'd been Macallan and 73 and Glenfiddich in 61 and Glen Grant, but I mean the sector in 1985 was 0.1% of all whiskey. It didn't exist, and so really the last 35 years, we're all in this together. This has been the growth of this extraordinary growth of single malt whiskey in such a very short period of time. And yet it was the origin, because that's how they started. So this whole idea of terroir, everybody says, it's a new idea. Well, no, it isn't, because they would have been terroir derived spirits back in the very, very beginning.
Has your kid told you you're full of crap yet, the way my kids have told me I'm full of crap? Be honest.
Yeah, probably. Probably.
Yep.
There we go.
But what does he prefer, Bruichladdich or Waterford?
I think Waterford, and I don't mean that. That's obviously Bruichladdich is something very, very close to my heart, as you know.
Yeah.
It was a big thing for me, and a lot of emotional and financial and cultural involvement. And it was something I would never ever forget. And I love the spirit. We're at a different age now. My bottlings of Bruichladdich are much older than we have with Waterford. So for maturity, that's fantastic. But it's the diversity of Waterford which I just find so compelling. There's a French guy I love, a marvelous guy called Michel Bindholz, who's a distiller in Alsace, of eau-de-vie. And I remember eating with him in a restaurant called the Schonenberg in the very picturesque village of Rickwehr in Alsace. And it's a vineyard, a Grand Cru vineyard. And the restaurant is right on the edge of the vineyard. And so here we were, first time together for 20 years, and lots to talk about. So we both chose a wine. Obviously, it had to be from that vineyard, but we both chose a different producer. Same year, same grape, same vineyard, right around us. And we chatted away, and we yarned and joked, and all through 5 courses of gastronomic magnificence. And by the end, we got up to leave, paid bill, and I looked back at the table, and the 2 wines we had, we'd drunk all of one, and we'd barely touched the other. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and he just shrugged his shoulders, and he just said, "It's the envie de boire." I said, "The envie de what?" "The envie de boire, the desire to drink." And what he meant by that was that we weren't paying attention to the wine. We were chatting away and whatever. And subconsciously, we filled up our glasses with the wine that our brains most enjoyed. One was elegant, well-balanced, rounded, harmonious. And the other was a show-stopping, wham, bam, in your face, no holds barred wine. And when it came to it, our brains chose the harmonious one over the wham bam, the showstopper. And I think that's a very interesting point. That we all know the showstoppers, the sherry bombs, and these big prize-winning, award-winning, standout whiskies. They stand out head and shoulders above everything else, which is why they win all the prizes. But you don't actually want to drink them. They're too much, and unless you're really really determined. And I think that's something I learned from my father in the wine world. Was about balance and harmony. That is what we cherish and we look for. It's not having slapped in the face by something and thinking, wow, isn't that good? And I think this is what we've got in spades with Waterford. Those odd stills from Inverleven and the technique that I just described to you. Barley in your face, but it gives you this whiskey that you enjoy drinking. It is harmonious. The way we've chosen the barrels and the policy provides that harmony, and the purity comes from the distillation, and the unctuousness from the slow distillation, the intensity from the fermentation, the barley flavors from the single farm origins. It provides a whole that is just very, very enjoyable and beguiling. I use that term, beguiling. It seduces you. And you go, well, that's very interesting. And you watch it perform and do its stuff. And then you tried. The first time I went to Islay with Waterford, it's like sacrilege, Waterford to Islay. And my farm friend.
Like Coles to Newcastle.
Yeah. Will, he knew, he'd seen the parcel. Some word had got round that this Waterford whiskey parcel had arrived. And he was down at my house, so, like a rat out of a drain pipe. And we opened up these bottles, and I was explaining, as we've just done, this farm is Hookhead, that farm is from there, and and we sat there, we chin wagged, and we drank, and we went on to the next one, and it was different, and then the next one, and that was different, and you realise that what we've created is something that is very shareable. It's something that you can argue about, you can debate, you can cajole, you can fisticuffs, or whatever you want. It's for sharing. It's to compare and to contrast, and it doesn't have to be technical. It's just sitting in an armchair, enjoying a dram, and seeing how it performs with that envie de boire, that desire to drink. And I think that's something I'm really, really proud of. Yeah,
I love what you're doing, Mark. And we've had a couple of folks that say, like Watchman 999 out of Alberta, Waterford should do a peated whiskey. And somebody asked earlier, would Waterford ever do a beer cask finished whiskey? And I'm thinking, oh, hell no. But
no,
I got to admit, go ahead.
We started. We don't need to finish anything because we started with the right stuff. What I would argue, and I know people would shoot me down for it, but is why isn't everybody else paying attention to the quality of wood? Why are we in this sort of nil-sum game of recycled wood and then sort of suddenly picking it all up at the last minute? I find that really strange, and it's slightly worrying. I think there's the possibility that finishing could end up being the finish of whiskey altogether. It's an existential threat, because at the end of the day, you say, well, why bother with barrels at all? Why bother? Why don't we just add flavorings?
Oh shit!
Yeah, quite.
Oh, don't even go there, please.
Well, yeah.
Okay, we have managed to kill an hour and 45 minutes of people's time that they'll never get back. I have to admit, okay, I've busted your chops many times, both during this webcast and on Twitter. Mm-hmm. But I but I do that out of complete respect, and I bust your chops just because I can.
Yeah, you can.
And just to keep you honest, because I respect what you're doing.
Well, that's very
and if I didn't respect what you're doing, you wouldn't be a guest on this webcast. Let's put it that way.
Well, it's very sweet of you saying that, because I have sometimes wondered, Mark. But I'm just
gonna. Hey, if I didn't bust your chops, you should be worried, because then I'd be ignoring you completely, Mark.
But I think where whiskey's going is all of us, we need to be aware of what's going on here, and I slightly worry about the long-term game. This desire at one side to go into flavored whiskies, which is sort of beginning to happen, and how that's going to sort of create this single malt whiskey pedestal effect.
Screw that.
I worry a bit about it. Yeah.
Screw that. I've been busting people's chops for years, and Dave Kuhn wants to go ask the rum question. I don't know what the rum question is, but why the hell did you decide to do a rum in the first place?
Well, I started with Simon and Andrew. We started the Renegade Rum Company back in 2004 or something, as an independent bottling company, like we did with Murray McDavid for whiskey. We did this for rum. And if you think the whiskey industry was in, an odd situation at the beginning, back in 1984, 85, the rum is even worse because the decline has been much, much longer. But there were stocks of old rum that had long gone, and we bottled them up and had great in doing that. But then we very quickly realized that the quality of rum available was, we were scraping the barrel, literally. And what on earth are we going to do? And there wasn't much of a business plan with that, because the stocks available were diminishing very rapidly, just like it did with back in the early 80s. So I then thought, well, crumbs, why don't I see if I can buy stocks with a distillery, like we did with Bruichladdich. But that never happened. There weren't any distilleries that you'd want to buy, and there weren't any stocks out there at all anyhow. So, after a 10-year sort of peregrination around the Caribbean and the Pacific, I realized that I'd actually have to build a distillery. So the idea was, again,
you just wanted an excuse to go screw around on Grenada.
Well, no, funny enough, I'm not a Caribbean fan, to be honest. Why do you think I live in Scotland?
Because you need sunshine once in a damn while.
No, but when you get it, it's bloody good,
Yeah. But you want it more often than you get it.
But the principle was, how can you make, or can you make a rum with the same complexity as a single malt? Can you do it? And you can see how the timelines have worked in tandem, because I started the Renegade Rum project the same time as Waterford. So we've been doing this now for 6 years. In Grenada, we had to grow the cane first to prove.
Well, you didn't have a Diageo there to build you a damn distillery first, except all you had to do was put the stills in.
So it's completely back to front. We had to grow the cane first, prove we could grow the cane, then build the distillery, then with COVID. So it was very blood, sweat, and tears has gone into this. Absolutely extraordinary. But with the premise that we could distill cane field by field on a terroir basis to add extra complexity to rum and assemble them together to create the cuvée, which would be greater than merely the sum of its parts. So it shares exactly the same philosophy. And the funny thing is, you know what the difference is? The varieties of cane produce a lot more diversity of flavor than do barley. And that's a really sad indictment, because for 50 years, barley flavor has, in the barley itself, has been arrested because they never looked to evolve it for 50 years, which I think is actually tragic.
Wow.
My head
Our
hurts.
pal Sergio Floridas at the Irish Whiskey Magazine is waiting for this one. He's asked this a couple of times. When are you going to use those rum casks from Grenada in Waterford?
Yeah. Well, hold on a second. Let us just fill the rum casks first. Right? Yeah. Give me a break, Sergio. Give me a break. Let's fill the casks first, which is what we're doing now. And so the first rum that we will bottle, ready for September, which will be a relatively small bottling, because unlike Waterford, we haven't had the chance to build up stocks because we spent all the money building the distillery. So the stocks are relatively small. So the first one will be pre-cask in September, and then a year later we'll release the same terroir. 1 year later in wood, And of course, the difference in the Caribbean is maturation is much faster. And so by combining premium wood with premium cane and slow distillation, et cetera, we anticipate producing a really serious matured rum by around about 2024, 25.
Okay. What was the biggest screw up that you guys made at Bruichladdich that you vowed you weren't going to do at Waterford, but you wound up doing anyway?
Oh, that I wound up doing anyway. I don't think I can answer that like that. I can say we made plenty of mistakes that I vowed not to make again.
But you didn't. But you did it anyway. But for whatever reason.
No, that's just it. What's the point in learning something and then repeating the same mistake? That would be absolutely ludicrous. That's the definition of madness, isn't it?
But that's not a good story. Is if you screwed up and did it again.
No,
screwing up and doing it again is the good story.
No, well, we haven't screwed up again. You know, as far as I'm aware, we haven't. No, we learned lots of mistakes. You know, not distilling enough at the beginning, not using premium wood from the beginning. These are things that have huge economic consequences. No, I learned my lessons big time, and equipping yourselves with a whole sales and marketing department from day one when you had zero sales. That's like a lead, round your neck. Master distillers and baggage, dropping the baggage, being free to do what you want to do without having to worry about, will everybody be okay with this? Is this all right? Enthusiasm of Waterford. It's, personally, I feel I've merited it. I've earned it. The alacrity with which I've been received and the ability to put into place all my plans and all my desires and vision has met with nothing but extraordinary acceptance. And we've got a great team at Waterford. The fact that I haven't even been there for a year, and they're just doing great things, because the whole thing is run on 17 people. It's extraordinary what we've been able to achieve there with really good caliber, bright, interested, why not people, free from any traditional sort of industry baggage. It's been an absolute joy.
Well, we've got almost 2 full hours tonight, and it's getting close to midnight your time in Edinburgh, and I bust your chops a lot, Mark. And
you do.
I do that out of love and out of respect, because if I didn't respect you, I wouldn't spend the time to bust your chops. And
so will you come to Grenada? Because you need a hat trick.
Why the hell would I go to Grenada to talk about rum? I talk about whiskeys, for crying out loud.
Well, you Americans,
I go to Grenada to do a suntan, dude.
You Americans have a habit of visiting Grenada in a fairly forceful way.
Oh, bite me. We haven't done that since Reagan, for Christ's sakes.
I know. And they actually celebrate it. It's celebrated as a national holiday.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But Mark, if I didn't respect you, I would ignore you.
Yeah,
and
I know.
I bust your chops because I can and because I care, my friend.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's very sweet of you. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you as a friend. And
likewise.
I know you make good whiskeys, and I'm pretty sure you make good rum, but I haven't tried it yet. So
come and see. Come and see. It's only 3 hours by plane from New York. So I'm getting closer.
We'll see.
I'm getting closer, Mark. I'm getting closer.
Get your ass
Ireland,
over here to New York and get your ass over here to the U.S. and buy a damn bourbon distillery.
Well, I tried to buy Charles Medley back in 2012.
Wait a second. I never heard this. You tried to buy Medley?
Yeah, but I was gazumped. Yeah.
Okay.
2012, I think. Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
But I got gazumped at the last minute. I thought it was all in the bag, but no, I got gazumped by some weird bloke. I don't know. You'd know more about it than I do. And I sort of lost interest in bourbon after that.
Oh, God, I can't imagine to see what you do with bourbon. God help us all.
Yeah.
Hey, Mark, thank you for doing this.
Cheers.
And I will see you again soon.
Thank you.
I can't wait to make sure we can share a dram together soon.
Well, yeah, whether it's Islay or Ireland or another Pacific island, Atlantic island, Grenada, it's probably really easier to get you to Grenada than it is to Ireland. I don't know. But you tell me,
and
next time you come to Ireland. As
Tabitha Spirit Bomb points out, bourbon all tastes the same anyway.
Well, it's probably a good thing too. You're right.
Okay. Mark, thank you for joining us, my
Good
friend.
night.
Take care. Keep in touch.
And you. Thank.
That's Mark Reynier, the managing director of Waterford Distillery in Ireland. Hey, next week we'll be joined by Colin Gordon from Ardbeg Distillery. Don't forget about the podcast this weekend. Thanks for watching. Have a great holiday weekend. Be safe, everyone. Wear your masks, get your shots, and hopefully we'll all be able to share a dram again together soon someday. Take care, y'all. Good night.